We are in Parshas Vayeitzei. So last week we ended the Parsha with Rivka and Yitzchak telling Yaakov that he should go and find a wife in Padan Aram. Interestingly enough, I saw in a book written by one of my teachers, by Rabbi Levine, he just brought out a new book, Parsha for the Curious, and he brings there that the only word in the Torah that's brought in Arabic is Padan, because it means the land of Aram. But so he sent to Padan Aram, where his family are, where Lavan, his uncle, his mother's brother, is, to go and find a wife. And he knows he's got a death warrant over his head because his brother wants to kill him because he has allegedly stolen, and I'll put those in big quotes, the blessings. There were 3 brachas given in last week's Parsha. Yitzchak's intention was really to give one bracha to Esav for this world, for Olam Hazeh, and another bracha to Yaakov for the next world to come, Olam Haba, the spiritual, the physical and the spiritual. What happened in the end was Yaakov got both brachas, and he acquired the birthright, the firstborn right from his brother. And Esav did get a small bracha. He did get a bracha, and essentially, if Yaakov doesn't behave like Yaakov, then Esav becomes ascendant. That's really the summary of that. Now Yaakov runs away, and he's told to go to Padan Aram to find a wife. So the Parsha begins, Vayeitzei Yaakov me Be'ersheva, v'yelech Haran. Yaakov left Be'ersheva and he went to Haran. He spent 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem and Ava on the way to Haran. It says he didn't really lie down to sleep at night. He spent 14 years learning Torah, whatever learning Torah was, because we know that the Torah was only given a few generations later to the Jewish people as when they were coming out of Egypt. But the Avos and the Imavos kept the Torah to whatever degree they understood the Torah, because the Torah, it says Hashem looked into the Torah and created the world. The Torah is like the blueprint, the plan for the whole world. Everything in the Torah is about the way this world is. And so the forefathers could figure out through spiritual emanations that come down into this world that they had to keep the mitzvahs. And they did that by tapping into Hashem. They connected to Hashem and were able to connect to the Torah. So therefore we know that last week's Parsha, Yitzchak asked Esav to go and get him 2 animals. Yaakov eventually brought the animals that his mother had cooked, and that we learn was on Yitzchak's birthday. Yitzchak was born on Pesach, so that was a Pesach Seder. They knew that on Pesach you need to eat a Korban Pesach and a Korban Chagiga, otherwise why would he bring 2 animals for one man? It's worth looking at what, and it's not for now, but just thinking about what was Yitzchak on about that he needed to eat in order to bless his child. Yitzchak Avinu doesn't need to eat food in order to do anything. Food was just a side product. He wasn't a foodie in today's terms. But he needed to be complete and whole, and he would have got that through 2 things. One is, if Esav did it and brought it to him, he was doing this mitzvah of kibbut av, honoring his father. And 2 is, he would have been doing the mitzvah of eating the Korban Pesach. By connecting to these mitzvahs, he is now complete, shalem, whole, and can give brachas. But he gives those over to Yaakov. Yaakov now goes and spends 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem and Ava, Shem being Noach's son, Ava being his great-grandson, and he spends these 14 years there. He now leaves and he's ready to go to Haran. But before he leaves, the Torah says, he encountered the place, and he went to sleep. He spent the night there, because the sun had set. So now, for the first time in 14 years, Yaakov Avinu is going to sleep. He lies down to sleep. The Torah says that he took stones, rocks that were in that place, and he lay down. And he had a dream. And he has a dream that Hashem comes to him, and he sees a ladder, the famous dream of Yaakov's ladder, and there's angels going up, and there's angels coming down. And the commentators say that the angels that were with him in the land of Israel are now leaving him, so to speak. And as he leaves, he gets other angels that come to be with him. And that's his angels going up and down. And Hashem gives him the promise now. Hashem gives him the bracha that he's given to Abraham and to Yitzchak. Hashem says, your offspring will be as the dust of the earth. You're going to spread out powerfully west, east, north, and south. In other words, across the four corners of the globe. And all families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and by your offspring. Hashem says, I'll be with you and I'll guard you wherever you go, and I'm going to return you back here. I will not forsake you until I have done what you have spoken about. And Yaakov wakes up and he says, oh, I'm in a holy place. The place I've slept in must be a holy place. And he got scared because he said, wow, this is an awesome place. We get that feeling sometimes when you go to the Kotel. When you go to certain places, you think, there's something special about it. You can't quite picture what it is. On Yaakov's level, he was able to picture where he was. He was on the Temple Mount, on Har HaBayis. So, and it said previously that he had gone to sleep and he woke with various stones, and he woke up and the stone, one stone. Some of the commentators learn out that is the stone of where the Aron sat, where the world was created from, Evan Shasir, the foundation stone of the world. And he names the place Beit Kale, Bethel, the South African town we know about. Lots of South African towns are named after biblical things. This is one of them. The house of Hashem, Beit Kale. We generally try, when we say it like that, we don't say Hashem's name, the Aleph and the Lamed, because it's got such special holiness. He then took a vow and he says, Hashem, if you'll be with me and you'll guard me on my way, and the way that I'm going, and you'll give bread to me and bread to eat and clothes to wear, then I'm going to come back. Hashem, you'll be my God. You'll be a God to me. And the stone that I set up as a pillar will become a house of God. And whatever you give me, I will tithe to you. I will give you everything I need to give. He realized, oh, hang on, there's the mitzvah of tithing, and he's going to give Maaseh when he comes back, whatever he earns. He also put oil on the rock to anoint that rock, to make it like a mizbeach. But it's also brought down, Rabbi Levine brings it down, that why did he put oil on this rock? Because when he comes back, you want to know where the place was. Water doesn't wash off oil. There would be some kind of a stain there still from the oil, and he'll know that that's the exact place. So then he lifts his feet and he goes east. He goes towards the land of the east, and he looks up, and the Torah says, Vinay, behold. In other words, he got there very, very quickly. There's a well. And we know, last week's Parshah, Yitzchak and the wells. And Yitzchak, when Eliezer went to find Rivka for him, it was done at a well. And Abraham had built wells. There's a lot to do with wells throughout all these Parshas. Moshe Rabbeinu met Tzipporah, his wife, at a well. There's always something about a well, because something in the well is hidden. There's water is not there. It's down below. It's hidden away. There's always something hidden. You've got to look below the surface. Got to scratch underneath things. So off he goes he finds this well, and suddenly he sees flocks coming. And everybody's hanging around, not getting water for their sheep. And there's this massive rock over this well. And he says to them, first he says, where are you from? He doesn't want to ask them straight out, am I in Haran? Because then nothing is lost. So he knows he's in Haran. He realizes, but he says, where are you from? Because if he says, where's Haran? Then suddenly you fool, you're right here. He says, no, we're from Haran. He says, oh, do you know Lavan? It's his uncle, his mother's brother, the son of Nachor. Now, Nachor is actually Lavan's grandfather. But Nachor was well known. Besuel, his father, had died the night that Rivka was going to go to meet Yitzchak. And he said, do you know Lavan, the son of Nachor? He said, yep, we know him. In fact, his daughter, Rachel, is coming here with her flock. And he says, what is wrong with you guys? I'm paraphrasing very much so here, but the sheep are sitting out there. You've got a mitzvah to water your sheep, to give them some water, and you're just sitting and waiting around. How about getting them some water and let them go and graze? And he says, no, they say to him, we have to wait until all the flocks come. And then we're going to water everybody's together. We don't want anybody to steal with this massive rock here. So what does he do? While they're still speaking, Rachel arrives, because Rachel was her father's shepherdess. She was in charge of her father's sheep. and he sees her, and he lifts up the rock. Yaakov Avinu was already an elderly man, but he pulls off the rock, no problem whatsoever, and he says to her, come and water your sheep. He rolls off this rock, and she waters her sheep, and Yaakov looks at her and introduces himself, gives her a kiss, and he tells her who he is. And then suddenly she runs back, and Lavan hears the news. And now Lavan remembers, oh, hang on. Eliezer the servant came with all gold and jewelry and all things for my sister Rivka. This is a grandson of Avram. He's got to be like, if the servant came with so many camels and so much stuff, he's got to have a fortune. And Lavan comes running because Lavan is the ultimate gangster. Problem is, Yaakov had absolutely nothing because Esav had sent his grandson to go and kill Yaakov before Yaakov left. And Yaakov said to him, it's a stupid thing to do, convinced him. He said, you know what? A person who is poverty-stricken, who has nothing, is as if he's dead. Just take all my stuff. Took all of his possessions. And so Yaakov arrived with the clothes on his back, which he acquired from a person who had died. That's all he was basically had with him. So Yaakov's got nothing. So Lavan looks at him and he tells Lavan what happened to him and where he's going. And Lavan says, okay, I didn't quite get everything I wanted from you, but you are my relative, you are my nephew, so come and stay with us. At least for a month. Stay for us for the month, he says. What's this month? He says, well, if you stay for a month, I can check you out and suss you out and see if you're what you're really here for. You're the real deal. Because Lavan is scheming, and we see this throughout the Parsha. Lavan just schemes with everything. And says, Yaakov says, okay, I'll come and stay for a month and I'll serve you. So Yaakov says to him, okay, just because you're my relative, you don't need to be my slave or my servant. Just tell me your wages. So he had 2 daughters. And the Torah then says, well, the name of the older one was Leah. The younger one was Rachel. Many bring down that they were twins, but they were certainly sisters, very close in age. And then it says that Leah's eyes were tender and Rachel was beautiful. Why were Leah's eyes tender? Many reasons brought. The main reason that's generally brought is it was said that, and we discussed this last week a little bit, there was supposed to be Avram, Yitzchak, Esav, and Yaakov, and Sarah, Rivka, Leah, and Rachel. Esav was meant to marry Leah. And everybody was telling Leah, oh, you're going to marry the gangster. And Leah was very, very sad. And she cried and cried and cried, so that her eyes were puffy, eyelashes were not so good looking. And so it's brought down by many of the fortune that she was actually much more beautiful than Rachel. But she was locked away. Other reasons brought, sometimes they say that Lavan locked her away because she was so beautiful. He wanted to reserve her for more money, yeah. But
He wanted the money.
But Yaakov had connected to Rachel. He realized his neshama was needed to be with Rachel's neshama. They were completely connected. And so Yaakov then says to Lavan, okay, I will serve you for 7 years. I'll work for 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Lavan says, that's a good idea. Better that I give him to a relative than to someone else. So Yaakov works for 7 years for Rachel. And comes at the end of 7 years, and Yaakov says, I've just been working for 7 years. You haven't paid me. It's time to give me my wife, please. And so Lavan brings all the people, and they make a big wedding feast, and they get married. And the next morning, Yaakov wakes up, and it is not Rachel, it's her sister Leah. Lavan has tricked him. And there's a big question, how can he not realize that it's not his wife? And Yaakov knew that Lavan was a swindler. And Yaakov had given certain secret signs to Rachel to say to her, so that your father doesn't swindle me, I'll know who you are. Here the signals are. And Rachel gave those signals to Leah because she didn't want to be selfish. She didn't want her sister to be completely upset by what was going on. She knew there was something going on. And so she was able to swindle. Whether she knew it or not, there's a whole lot of commentary about who knew what in all of this? But it seems as if Leah was a little bit blindsided herself. She didn't realize that she wasn't supposed to marry Yaakov, but she did. And Yaakov is not very happy, and he comes to Lavan and says, "You've deceived me." And Lavan makes an excuse. He says, well, interestingly enough, he says, this is not done in our place. We don't marry the younger one before the older one. And he's alluding to the fact that, hang on, you're the younger one. You stole the older one's birthright. He's kind of having a little bit of a dig at Yaakov under the surface of it all. And he says, okay, you want her? Just keep this first week, you can have her, and then you can marry Rachel after a week, and then do another 7 years of work for her. So he's going to get 2 women in a week, into the first week, and then he's going to work another 7 years. So he's going to get 14 years of work for his 2 wives. Yaakov did as Lavan had suggested, and he's given Rachel as a wife, and now he's got these 2 wives. Now, the fact is, I started off saying that they kept the Torah. The Torah is very, very explicit that a man is not allowed to marry 2 sisters. The only time that's allowed to happen is if one of the sisters, if his wife passes away, or if a couple get divorced. The man is never allowed to marry the woman, sister, whilst she's alive. If she passes away, then he can. And here we've got one of our forefathers contravening one of the halachas in the Parsha. Even more so, in next week's Parsha, it says when he meets up with his brother Esav again, he says, Im Lavan Garti, I sojourned with Lavan Garti. The word Garti has the same letters as the word Tyriag, meaning 613. Not only did I sojourn there, I kept all 613 mitzvahs. Well, no, you didn't, Yaakov. You married 2 sisters. So there's lots of explanations. And one of the things is that Rachel died just as they got into the land of Israel. Next week's Parsha. And so one of the explanations is that we need to keep the mitzvahs in the land of Israel is the real deal. What we're keeping out of Israel, let's call it training wheels, preparation. It's not at the same level. And therefore, he didn't have to do exactly what he needed to do out of Israel as he would do in Israel, which is one of the reasons brought why Rachel passes away just as they go into the land of Israel. But they kept the mitzvahs voluntarily. They didn't, as we said, the Torah hadn't been given yet. And so it's the way they interpret things, and this is how Yaakov interpreted it. He's not so much held to account for that. Rachel is loved more than Leah by Yaakov because she was the one that his neshama connected with right from the word go. But Hashem saw that Leah wasn't loved so much. And so Hashem opened up her womb and Rachel was barren. So we had Sarah who was barren till she was 90 years old. We had Leah Rivka who was barren last week and the week before. Well, last week's Parsha, they had to daven for 20 years. She couldn't have a child. And now we've got Rachel who's barren. Leah, because she seems like not so loved, the Torah says straight out, Hashem gave her a child straight away. She conceived, and she had a son called Reuven, because Hashem saw her humiliation. Her sister was much more loved than her, and she says, "Oh, Reuven comes from to see." She suddenly could see, maybe my husband will love me more now that I've given him a son. And then she conceives again, and she has a second child. And she says, "Oh, Hashem has heard that I'm unloved." And she called him Shimon, from to here. And then she conceived a third time. And she bore him another son. And she says, this time my husband's going to be attached to me. And Yaakov then calls his name, or perhaps Hashem names him, Levi. Doesn't say she named him, says he named him. Whether the he is Hashem or it could be Yaakov. And then she conceives again, a fourth time, and she calls her son Yehuda, because Yehuda means to be thankful. She was suddenly saying, now I can be thankful. Yehuda is 2 things. Hodah, meaning being thankful, and it's Hashem's name in it. Hashem's name, the Yud, the Hey, then the Vav, and the Hey with a Dalet in the middle, Yehuda. And then she stops giving birth. She's had 4 children. Now, there was a tradition that people thought that they knew there were going to be 12 tribes. It was brought down prophetically. They knew 12 tribes were coming. They didn't know how the tribes would manifest themselves, but it was thought that there would be 4 mothers that would give birth to 3 children each. And suddenly she's got 4 of the 12. She's ahead of the game. And so she is now extremely thankful. At the time when each of them were married, Lavan gave 2 other of his others, possibly, it's brought down they're probably daughters, concubine daughters from concubines, or perhaps even they're full daughters, but much young, a little bit younger. But he gave Bilhah and Zilpah as maids to each of Leah and Rachel. So we've got these 4 women involved. And now Rachel is now realizing, hang on, similar to what Sarah had done with Hagar, giving Hagar to Avram to have a child, she says, well, she is barren, it seems like, so she gives her maid to Yaakov. She gives Bilhah to Yaakov to have a child with Bilhah. And Yaakov is with her, and she conceives and has a son. And Rachel says, oh, Hashem has judged me. And from the word for judging being done, she calls her son Dan. And then, yeah, this is the birth of all the tribes. And then Bilhah is born, conceives again. She gives Yaakov a second son, and she calls him Naphtali. And each of the names, I'm not going to go through any of the details of all of them now, but each of the names comes with prophetic vision or a thought as to why this child was born and what the essence of that child is. And we should know that when a parent comes to name their child, not the secular English names we all have, but the Hebrew name a child is given with some form of Ruach HaKodesh, with some form of divine inspiration. And so, for whatever reason, Hashem wants that name to give to the person. And that's one of the reasons why in the Ashkenazi world, for sure, we name after relatives that are no longer alive, because it brings something back from that neshama back into the world. There's a connection between the relatives not alive and the neshama. Sfardim have a minhag to name after people who are alive, and often you'll have people named after their grandfather, sometimes even father, for other reasons. And there are various different customs developed over time in different places. So now we've got 4 children from Leah, 2 children from Bilhah, and Leah realizes, okay, hang on, I've stopped giving birth, and so she now gives her maid Zilpah to Yaakov as a wife. So now Yaakov has married 4 women. Whether Bilhah and Zilpah are wives or concubines doesn't really make a difference, but they're on a lower level, I guess, than Rachel and Leah. And Zilpah falls pregnant and gives birth, and she has a child, and she says, oh, this is good. She calls him Gad. And Zilpah then has a second child, and she says, oh, I'm so fortunate, I'm going to call him Asher.
Only boys.
Yes, only boys at this time. It's brought down in Chazal, in the Midrash, that there may well have been twins with all of them. Each one had a twin. It's not necessarily exactly what happened, but we don't know, the Midrash brings down. But certainly we'll see soon that there was at least one girl. We will come to her shortly. And then, now, so we've got 6 boys in about 6 years or so. It's very possible that Gad and Asher might have been twins, because for all of them it says that she conceived and she bore a child. For Asher, it just says Leah's maidservant bore a second son to Yaakov. It doesn't say that she conceived. And so it's possible that they were twins. And it's brought down, Rabbi Levine brings down in his book, Parshah for the Curious, he brings down that some of the Mefarshim bring that it may well have been that one was born after 7 months and one after 9 months. In ancient times, interestingly enough, just as an aside from that, it said that, and this is not relevant today, but it said that a child who was born in the 7th month of pregnancy, 7th month gestation, or 9 months, would have lived. A child born after 8 months would not survive for whatever reasons, but that's generally how they bring it down. And so related to that, if a woman loses her husband or gets divorced, she's not allowed to marry for 3 months. Because in case she is pregnant from her husband, and if she has a 7-month child or a 9-month child, there might be suspicions as to who the actual father is. And therefore, Chazal said you have to wait 3 months in order to get remarried again. And the halachas are different between a man and a woman depending on various different factors. But we learn our halachas from these little things. Okay, so then now Reuven, who is now the eldest, is about 6 or 7 years old. There's 8 children, and Reuven goes out into the fields. And he comes back, a little 6-year-old kid, and he thinks, what do 6-year-old kids do? I want to bring mommy a present. And he finds wild flowers called dudayim on the side of the road. And he brings these wild flowers to his mother. The Meforshim discuss what these are. Most opinions say they were jasmine, what we would call jasmine. Sweet-smelling flowers. He sees that his mother's not having any children. It's learnt out that they are probably some kind of aphrodisiac or some kind of medicinal plant that will help a woman fall pregnant. And he gives it to his mother, and Rochel is feeling bad. These plants, she knows, okay, this might help me to conceive. So she says to her sister Leah, please give me some of these dudayim. And Leah says to her, was it not enough that you took my husband from me? Now remember, Leah was... So this is a signal to say that Leah probably didn't know. There's no ways one of our mothers would have been like saying that. Leah's clearly, it seems from this line, didn't know that Rochel was supposed to marry Yaakov and that she was given as a trick in there. So Rochel says, you know what? Let me have some of the flowers, and it's my turn to be with Yaakov tonight. You can have him. And so when Yaakov comes home that evening, he's in the field. He's still a farmer for his father-in-law. Leah goes out to meet him. And it says that you need to be with me. She says to him, you need to be with me tonight because I've given away my son's Dudayim, and therefore it's my turn. And she lay with him that night, and she davened, and Hashem listened to her prayers, and she conceived again and had a 5th child. And Leah says, I've got a reward, so she called him Issachar. And then she conceived again, and she had a 6th child. And she says, okay, now Hashem's made a permanent home, and she calls him Zvulun. And then she bore a daughter called Dinah.
Yeah.
Okay, now, interestingly enough, no, there's more than one girl in the house. Interestingly enough, she went out. It says there that Leah went out to meet Yaakov. We're going to find next week's Parsha that Dinah goes out. Unfortunately, Dinah is taken by Shem and is raped. And the whole consequence of that, we'll come back to that in a week or so's time. Then it suddenly says, Hashem remembered Rochel. And he opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son. And she said, Hashem has now taken away my disgrace. So she called him Yosef. Yosef meaning to add on. She added on and gave him, may Hashem add another son for me, she says. And she was zoichet to have another child. Next week's Parshah, she has Binyamin, and she dies. And so that is the story of the birth of 11 of the 12 of the 12 tribes, the 12th one being born next week's Parsha. And now that Yaakov has all his sons, Yosef is born, he says, it's time to go. He says, you know what? We've overstayed our welcome. I've been here for 7 years serving for Rochel, and I got Leah. Another 7 years for Rochel, 14 years. I've been here for 6 years, 20 years in total. I've got 12 children, 11 sons and 1 daughter, and maybe I've got more than that with twins of girls with each of the boys, but we got a family, it's time to leave. And he goes to Lavan and he says, please give me my wives and my children. I've served you enough now. You're aware of how much I've labored for you. And Lavan says, not so quick. Yes, he says, I've learned that I've been blessed because of you. I'm a diviner. I'm able to divine certain things, and I've learned from you. So he says, tell me what wages you want and just stay on a bit longer. So Yaakov comes up with a scheme and he says, you know what? I have worked for you for all this time. I have had livestock dying on me and I've never said that was your problem, not mine. Even though halachically I didn't have to replace the livestock, I did. It was always on my own account. And I sat up at night in the snow and the cold, and I chased after sheep, and I helped you, and I non-stop, and the heat of the day. All I did was for you. So Yaakov says, you know what? I'll pasture your sheep for a bit longer. Let's just come to a deal. Any sheep that I'm just paraphrasing very quickly, but any sheep that come out that are speckled or spotted, those will be mine. The pure ones will be yours. And Lavan says, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So Yaakov then takes, through some form of Kabbalistic knowledge, he takes different twigs and trees and plants and puts them before the sheep when they're mating, and they get spots or stripes, however it works. And what we learn from these things is and this applies to human beings very much as well, the thoughts of people when their child is conceived impact on that child. However that works. Just like we said last week, the clothes you wear impact on you. When a couple are together, the way they are thinking and the way they're behaving impacts on the nature of that child. And the same thing happens here with these animals. So they're seeing stripes and spots and various different things. And from a very deep level, different types of animals are born, different looking animals. And this is how it goes on and on. And so he took out the speckled ones and the striped ones and the spotted ones, and he left the pure ones for Esav. And then he took other rods. It says he took poplar and hazelnut and chestnut rods, and he peeled them. And he set the rods which had been peeled into the runnels in the receptacles where the flocks came to drink. So become stimulated when they came to drink. Then he stimulated by the rods, the flocks gave birth to ringed ones, speckled ones, and spotted ones. And he did this over and over again. And he separated the flocks, his flocks from Lavan's flocks. He never stole. He kept his bargain all along. And he became extremely prosperous and wealthy. And he had maidservants and servants and camels and donkeys. And now there starts to be a bit of trouble. Lavan's saying, sons are starting to say, hang on. This guy, Jacob, he's come along in here. He's stealing from our father. He's taken what belongs to us. That's our stuff. It's not his. And Hashem comes to Yaakov and says, time to go. So Yaakov calls his wives, calls Rachel and Leah, remembering that those are the main wives. And he says to them, it's time to go. But I need your permission. I'm not just stealing you from your father. Are you ready to come with me? Your father's mocked me. He's changed my wages 100 times. But Hashem has kept me going, and Hashem has let me prosper here. Thank you. And it's time to go. And Rachel and Leah replied to him, you're our husband. We've seen what our father's done. We know he's a swindler. We are with you 100% of the way. Let's go. And so Yaakov lifts his children and his wives onto camels, and he leads them away. In the stealth of the night, off they go. And he goes to his father Yitzhak in the land of Canaan. Lavan has now gone to shear the sheep a few days' distance away, and he doesn't know this, but he's got these little things called trophim, which are idols, little shrunken heads of people, and the Torah tells us that Rachel stole them. Why did Rachel steal them? Possibly because she was trying to stop her father from being an idol worshipper, not because she was an idol worshipper herself. Lavan is now told, your son-in-law has stolen your daughters, your grandchildren, and they're running off, and they've stolen all the sheep that they've stolen from you. Go and catch up. So Lavan chases after them, and he catches up to them on Har Gilad, on Mount Gilad. And he overtakes Yaakov, and he pitches his tent, and he waits for them. And he says to Yaakov, what have you done? You've deceived me. You've stolen from me. You fled stealthily. You cheated me. Nor did I tell you, if I would have sent you off with gladness and with song, I would have sent you. If you just asked me, I would have sent you, no problem whatsoever. You didn't even allow me to kiss my sons and daughters. He's talking about his grandchildren and his daughters. You're a fool. It's in my power to harm me. But you know what? Your God came to me in a dream last night, and he said, don't speak badly or well to Yaakov. Just leave him alone. And so there's a problem here, because you stole my gods. Hashem has come to him in a dream, and he's focusing on that Yaakov has stolen his gods. And Yaakov has no idea what he's talking about. He says, I was scared. Maybe you might steal your daughters from me. I've known what you've done. You know what? Whoever finds your gods, whoever it's with, that person won't live. Go find for yourself. And Lavan goes and starts rummaging. Now, to some degree, Yaakov has had some kind of prophecy here, because he said, whoever's stolen your gods is not going to live. The Torah has told us already that Rachel had stolen them. And so Lavan comes into Yaakov's tent, he goes into Leah's tent, goes into the two maidservants' tent and Bilhah and Zilpah's tent, and he can't find anything. And he comes back through Leah's tent, and he goes into Rachel's tent. Now the Torah tells us again, Rachel has stolen the trophim, but she put them in her camel's sack, in the bag on the camel. Lavan rummages through the whole tent, and he just can't find anything. And Rachel, who's now sitting on the camel, says to him, excuse me, my lord. She's talking to her father. Don't be angered. I can't get up. She says, the way of women has come upon me. I've got my period. I can't stand up for you. So he searched and searched and searched. Now she's sitting on the camel with these things in the camel bag. He couldn't find them. And Yaakov says, enough is enough. Just stop. You can't find these things. Stop blaming me and my family. You've cheated us so much. You've rummaged through everything. You've ruined everything. It's a little bit like customs when they rummage through someone's bag and they don't repack it. This is Lavan. He's like the customs at the border. He's the customs agent. That's what he's doing. He said, whatever you found, just put it between us and let's see what you found that's yours that I've stolen. He says, I've worked for you for 20 years. He says, your ewes and your she-goats never miscarried. Neither did your rams. I didn't eat one of your rams. What was mangled, I never brought before you. I replaced it. He says, by scorching sun and freezing cold nights, I served you non-stop. He says, these 20 years I've been in your house. I served 14 years for your two daughters, 6 years for your flocks. You changed my wage 100 times. Enough is enough. Let's just move on, please. So Lavan gets up and he says, those are my daughters. And the children are my children. The flock is my flock. Every single thing you've got is mine. This is the thought process of a Lavan. But what can I do to them, to my daughters? Am I going to kill my children? My daughters? My grandchildren? I can't do that. Okay, let's make a deal. We'll make a covenant. And Hashem will be the witness. The God that came to me in a dream last night, he'll be the witness between us. So they gathered stones, and Yaakov says to his children, bring the stones. Let's gather some stones and we'll make a mound. They ate there on the mound. Lavan called the place Yegar Shahadusa, and Yaakov called it Gilad. Yegar Shahadusa is an Aramaic word. That's the only Aramaic words in the Torah. And Lavan declared, this is a witness, this mound is a witness between us, and this is going to stop us from treating each other badly. We know if we come to this place, we know either of us is not going to go beyond it to treat each other badly, and don't cross over from here. Yaakov swore by his father and his grandfather, or just by his father, Yaakov it said, may the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor judge between us. That's what Lavan said, and Yaakov swore by the dread of his father Yitzchak, because Yitzchak's still alive, so he couldn't say by the God of his father. Yaakov slaughtered for a feast on the mountain. Lavan gets up early in the morning, he kisses his daughters and blesses them, and he goes to his place, and Yaakov goes on his way, and the angels that encountered him return. And he said, oh, Kasher Ra'am Machane Elokim. This is a godly camp. And he called the place Machanaim, camps, because those angels that left him when he was leaving Israel on the ladder, those ones that went up, now come back. It's a changeover again. He's come back to Eretz Israel. He's now there. So what do we have in this Parsha? We have the birth of 11 of the 12 tribes. What happened to those 12 tribes? So I want to discuss for a short time, where did we all go from that point in time? Very quick bit of history. Let's go through a few thousand years of history in a few minutes. Yaakov goes back to the land of Israel. We're going to learn in the next few weeks. Binyamin is born, as we said. Rachel dies. Yaakov gives Yosef his coat. The brothers get envious and jealous of Yosef. They sell him down to Egypt. There's a famine. They all come down to Egypt, and we are now stuck and Yaakov comes down, we're stuck 210 years in Egypt. After that, we go out. We get the Torah with Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai, 40 years in the desert, and Yeshua takes us into the land. Yeshua spends the next 14 years conquering the land of Israel, getting rid of the Canaanite people, the Canaanim, that are in the land of Israel, or the land of Canaan as it was, taking over. People, the Canaanite tribes are offered to leave, or if they want to go into battle, to go into battle. Some left, some battled. And most of the land is taken over. King David comes and buys the city of Yerushalayim, that area, and from the Jebusites, one of the Canaanite tribes, and we've now settled the land. Through the 400 odd years from the time Yeshua comes in until David HaMelech, or until Shaul HaMelech, we had the period of the judges, where the tribes are now living. We had 9.5 tribes living in the land of Israel itself, 2.5 tribes living over Yarden, on the other side of the Jordan River, on the east bank of the Jordan, in what's today Syria, possibly Jordan, and countries of Jordan and Syria. And that becomes the whole land of Israel. In King David's time, he captures the area of Syria as well, another area, and that becomes annexed to Israel. We have the country of Eretz Israel, let's call it that, the kingdom of David. His son Shlomo builds the temple, and the first temple is built, and the first temple lasts for 410 years. After Shlomo's death, there is a split in the kingdom, and the 10 northern tribes set up the kingdom of Israel. The 2 southern tribes set up the kingdom of Yehuda, the tribes being Yehuda and Binyamin. And the rest of the book of the Nevi'im discusses what happens, the book of Kings particularly, what happens over this period of time until the destruction of the temple, essentially. The northern kingdom is exiled by the Assyrians, and we have what we call the 10 lost tribes. There was, however, a lot of trading between the tribes, and so whilst the majority of those 10 tribes did disappear, there are many Jews today, we don't know who are descendants of the 10 lost tribes. They are, because they would have been in Yehuda at the time when the 10 tribes were dispersed by the Assyrians. The Babylonians come along 150 odd years later and destroy the first temple and exile almost all of the Jews, most of the Jews that are left, to Babylon, becomes Persia. We come back with the story after Purim story, with the Megillah in Purim, with Esther, rebuild the temple. The second temple is built by Ezra and Nehemiah. Very few Jews actually came back, but the Jewish population grows in Eretz Israel. It thrives in Bavel over time, and we have these two populations, but people come back for Yomim Tovim to the temple until the Romans come along. The Greeks firstly with the Hanukkah story, and then the Romans. And the Romans come along and disperse most of the Jews through the Roman Empire and destroy the temple. And the Jews essentially split up across the North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, Southern Europe, and then start going into Northern and Eastern Europe. And what we have there is essentially two main groups, but many other smaller groups of Jews, which become known as Ashkenazim and Sephardim. Sfard meaning Spain, and Ashkenaz meaning Germany. And different practices develop across the different regions. As we said, Ashkenazim name after dead relatives, Sephardim name after living relatives in many cases. It's not halacha, it's not, but that's often what does happen. And different practices develop, but there's a common theme throughout. And that common theme is called the 613 Laws of the Torah. There is a Gemara. The Gemara comes from, there's two. There's Mishnah, developed around just after the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. And then from the Mishnah, we get two Gemaras. We get a Yerushalmi, which was written by the rabbis in Eretz Israel after the destruction of the temple. And we get the Bavli, written by the rabbis in Bavel, in Babylon. But we have this kind of split. We also have Jewish people in the Taimani, are different to the Sephardim, people in Yemen. There's connections and they have many common practices, but differences developed. But there is some common theme throughout all Jews. And there is a connection always coming back to the Torah. The base Torah is always the same. The Gemara is filled with machlokas, with differences, with arguments. Virtually every argument in the Gemara is about the rabbinic fences added to the Torah. Those things to protect the Torah. There's no argument in the Torah if we should keep Shabbos. Shabbos is sacrosanct. Everybody knows it. What we do on the sidelines, how we do things slightly differently, is what they argue about. And it's really based on tradition from rabbis and teachers going back generations. But it got me thinking all of this. Last week, Cynthia sent me a video on DNA and said, what do you think of this? I had been talking to a few people a few weeks ago, about a month ago, 6 weeks ago. Actually, it was on Sukkot. We were discussing recent studies in DNA and how they've been finding various different things recently and connections and how we as a Jewish people are connected through our DNA. And so I've been doing a little bit of research already prior to getting that video. And so I thought, let me do a little bit more research. So I want to start a little bit backwards. We spoke about I mentioned Kohanim and Leviim come from Levi. Some years ago, back to 1997 into the early 2000s, they discovered a chromosome, a Y chromosome that comes through. They're able to discover, to work out the DNA today, both sides of a person, for the Y and the X chromosomes, where their DNA comes from essentially. And they started working out that there's a lot of people who say they're Kohanim, who have some commonality in their DNA structure. And so these initial findings, I'm not going to go through all the technical terms because that's well beyond my knowledge, but I've got the notes on it. But something like 50% of Ashkenazi Kohanim and 56% of Sephardi Kohanim in these early studies had this gene, which was quite impressive. Later on, from about 2013 until current times, they've started doing much higher studies at a higher resolution, able to tap in much higher. And they've got this haplogroup J1P58, and it's got subcodes. And it's saying this shows that the branch comes from Middle Eastern origin, that people from the Middle East have this. And it's showing somewhere between 80 and 90% of Kohanim in our times have this Y chromosome. And almost nobody else has it. They find like groups of it in other Middle Eastern peoples, very like spread out groups, but it's condensed into Kohanim essentially. Now, that doesn't prove that a person who says they're a Kohen and has this gene is a Kohen. It just proves that their great-great-great-great-grandfather, in fact, they can trace it all the way back to about 3,300 years ago. And who lived 3,300 years ago? They can trace it back to one person, Aaron HaKohen. So we've got a direct line. Now, that doesn't mean that I say I'm a Kohen, that I can prove I'm a Kohen. Because we don't rely on DNA to prove things like that. Because whilst a Kohen might have inherited this Cohen gene from his father, grandfather, etc., all the way back to Aaron, somewhere along the way, it's possible that he married a divorcee or a convert. And if somebody did that, then their children become halalim, they're no longer kohanim. They might still retain that gene. But it's only passed down from father to son. Now, the Torah told us this 3,500 years ago. We are only discovering it right now, which is incredible. So if we just look a little bit in a few minutes about Ashkenazim, Sfardim. Okay, so we find that, firstly, let's just take a step back. I've been watching a few videos by Professor Henry Abramson. If you ever want to learn about Jewish history, he is the foremost world expert. As far as I know, he's still teaching at Touro College, which is in America, I think it's part of Yeshiva University. His knowledge of Jewish history is beyond anything imaginable. And so he's coming from the history side of it. I want to come a little bit today from the DNA side of it. Not that I know much about DNA and DNA testing or anything like that, but just some of the research and some of the papers I've been looking at. So there are lots and lots of papers that have been written, serious, peer-reviewed scientific studies that show that Ashkenazi Jews, and I'll try and say it from outside, not inside, so if I get anything wrong, apologies, but Ashkenazi Jews essentially stem from, on the Y chromosome side, Middle Eastern, Levant origin people. Very similar to Sephardi Jews. Sephardi Jews seem to be much more close-knit on the X chromosome side, on the mother side, and can be traced very closely to that region. North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and certainly into Spain and southern Europe. Ashkenazi Jews seem on the female side to come from a very small group of women of Italian descent. Now, what is believed is that possibly what happened is the Jewish people were firstly moved around the Roman Empire, secondly voluntarily might have moved around the Roman Empire. And some of them landed up in Italy, particularly it seems like in northern Italy. They may well have been slaves, but they certainly prospered over the years later on in the Roman Empire. Towards the end of the Roman Empire, they definitely prospered in that region. There's evidence that the Jewish people did very, very well. They may well have brought in some non-Jewish women who converted, or didn't convert, we don't know, but we assume they did. And these women form the core of Ashkenazi Jewry. In fact, they seem to be able to trace it back to 4 women. Now, it's last to say, Henry Abramson said this in a video I saw the other day, let's call them Sorek, Rachel, and Leah. It's not going back to them, but it is going back to them. But these people seem to have moved from Italy up to the Rhineland, Germany, Ashkenaz. Now, interestingly enough, the first time we encounter Ashkenaz in the Torah, Ashkenaz is brought in the Torah. When the Torah describes in Parshas Noach, the descendants of Noah, if I can find it quickly, I will. It says that Noach had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yafes. And Yafes had a son called Gomer. Yafes is generally Yefes, the Greeks. Yefes had a son called Gomer. Gomer had a son called Ashkenaz. Now, is that the same Ashkenaz that became Germany? Possibly, probably, maybe not. We don't know. It seemed maybe not, but it's the same name. So Ashkenaz is the word for Germans. And these small, very tight-knit group of Jewish people seem to have moved to that region. they very quickly developed their own way of serving Hashem in the Jewish religion. Not much different anywhere else, but their own customs, let's call it. And they also very quickly developed a language, Germanic-based language called Yiddish. Just like the Sephardi Jews developed Ladino, and just like Jews in the Arabian Peninsula spoke Hebrew Arabic, in all three cases they were very closely connected to the language of the locals, but all written in Hebrew script. So Yiddish is written in Hebrew letters, but it's a Germanic language. It's got some Aramaic and some Hebrew thrown into it. Similar with Ladino and Arabic in the Arabian countries, but there's lots and lots of similarities. And that group of people, very tight-knit, close community, started spreading eastwards into Poland, Lithuania, Russia, southeast into Hungary. It seems to be where they all went. And that's why all of those people, even though they are in Poland or in Lita, still spoke Yiddish and are still called Ashkenazi Jews because they've got this connection. The fascinating thing is there's certain diseases, I mean, we all know Tay-Sachs diseases, other diseases, stomach ailments, which Ashkenazi Jews suffer from significantly more than most others, possibly because there was such a tight-knit, close-knit community, Crohn's being one of them, that there was some kind of, I don't want to use the word inbreeding, but there was people were marrying close relatives because there wasn't a big pool of people. And so we start seeing things now, which anecdotally we knew, but now we're proving through DNA technology that all of what we suspected is absolutely true. The fascinating thing is how close we are, Ashkenazim and Sephardim, particularly on the Y chromosome side, almost identical, showing that what the world has been going on for more than 2 years, but certainly the last 2 years, that we have no right to land and we just came from Europe. It's just proving how much more of a connection we have to the land of Israel, to the Jewish people, and how connected we are. We have this connection. I'll just tell you, we'll end with this. In Poland, there was a rabbi in the 1500s called Rabbi Moshe Isserles. And Rabbi Moshe Isserles was writing a simple book on how Jewish people need to live their lives. A halacha book based on a book called The Tur. The Tur wrote a halacha work. Rabbi Moshe Isserles wrote a commentary on that halachic work, and he was writing a book in Krakow on how the Jews should live their lives. A Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch means set table. This is how we live our lives. A small book on exactly day to day how a Jew needs to live across our lifetimes. He finds out that there's a rabbi called Rabbi Yosef Karo who lives in Sfat in northern Israel at the same time, who has just published his book called Shulchan Aruch. Now, Rabbi Moshe Isserles' lifetime work is this Jewish book. And Rabbi Yosef Karo has written this book. Rabbi Yosef Karo was one of the Kabbalists of Sfat. Deep Kabbalistic thinker, phenomenal works from him. He wrote many Kabbalistic works, but here he writes the basic halachic work. And Rabbi Yosef Karo, known as the Ramah, Moshe Isserles, known as the Ramah in Krakow, says, I'm destroying my work. He rips up his work as never published. He says we cannot have two different Shulchan Aruchs in the Jewish world. We have to have one. And so he refuses to write a book. What he does, though, he takes the Shulchan Aruch written by he's known as the Mechaber, the author, because he wrote the primary, final Jewish work on halacha, and he says, okay, I'm going to write differences between Ashkenazi and Sephardi practices, known as a mappa, a tablecloth. So we've got the Shulchan Aruch being the tzet table, we've got the tablecloth on top of that, so wherever in the Shulchan Aruch there's a difference in practice, not in halacha, but just in the way we do things differently, he writes what we call glosses in English, just extra little editorial notes. Oh, by the way, in our areas we do this. And so this is just proving so much more so how much we are one people. together with all those other people who are now coming back to Judaism. I saw this morning that there's groups of people, they're going to be bringing back people called the B'nai Menashe from India. Now, they will need to be converted back to some form of conversion because they haven't kept all the Jewish practices. But they have a connection in this DNA studies as well, back to us. Japanese not. No. The Chinese, there's a Chinese group. They don't have the DNA. That was probably, the Chinese was, I think they're called Kaofeng. Jewish traders went to China and converted people. So they don't have any Jewish DNA in them. They did keep Jewish practices. If they converted properly, then they're properly Jewish, even if they don't have the same DNA. The Ethiopians, similar kind of thing. So all those people, even the Russians today who have come back to Israel in the last decades, they need to go through some form of conversion, even if they are Jewish, even if their DNA proves they're Jewish, because they didn't have that connection that we've all had. The Ashkenazim, the Sephardim, the Taimani, others have had a straight connection all the way back to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and the 12 tribes. And if we can make that connection and realize that we are, whilst we come from Eastern Europe and Sephardim might come from North Africa or from the Arabian Peninsula or from Spain before that, there are so many connections and so much between us that we are actually one people. And when we realize that we're one people, then Hashem will realize and show us that He's one, and we'll see that Hashem's one, we are one, and then He'll bring Mashiach speedily in our time.
Amen.